Okay, hello. So we got I think more changes than people were expecting to essentially every spec in the game because they decided they were gonna remove combat add-ons at the start of midnight. So we do have a grounds up rework for Frost Mage, which has a number of good things to it, a number of problems, especially in light of the add-on removal. And I wanted to go through what the rework actually is because I saw a lot of people were confused earlier today, and then go through some of my problems with it, things I hope they improve. I don't have alpha, at least I don't think I'll have alpha, so I won't be able to really do that much for testing or anything, but I'll try and highlight everything that we can talk about. The main thing to know is that they essentially made Frost a better version of Unholy Decay, right? Unholy Decay has its whole Festering Wounds thing. You apply the wounds, they consume them with Scourge Strike. That does damage, okay? That's exactly what Frost Mage does now. It applies a debuff called Freezing, and then when you Ice Lance, it removes a certain number of stacks of Freezing to do a flat amount of damage based on how many it removes. So Freezing is a debuff that essentially all of your spells, except Ice Lance, apply, and Ice Lance consumes that to just do a damage event. It's called Shatter. So we'll put this down here, I guess. So essentially, you Frostbolt, get one stack of freezing, and then you would flurry into +3 freezing stacks against debuff, and then you would Ice Lance, and this consumes the 4 freezing stacks to cause 4 shatter effects, flat damage. Okay, it's not really flat damage; it can change, but it's just damage. This is essentially Frost's new gameplay rotation. And there's very little that consumes freezing, so you're going to be spamming a lot of Ice Lances. This is a better mechanic than Unholy because it's just easier to get freezing stacks, less annoying. And then, yeah, Ice Lance can just consume them, and Ice Lance can actually consume them in AoE as well. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll look at some gameplay examples later. I don't think it's really going to help you. But when I say this is a grounds up rework, what I mean is this is literally just not Frost Mage as you know it. It has the similar names to its spells, but the functionalities are going to be completely different. Any spell that you liked, consider it essentially removed. It's now replaced with just something entirely different. So things that they removed, for instance, if I kind of go down here, they removed Blast Wave, they removed Ice Flows, they removed Mass Barrier, they removed, I guess it doesn't show all of them. Let's go down to Frost. They removed Icy Veins, Lonely Winter, Bone Chilling, Sub-Zero, Splitting Cold, Chain Reaction, Chiropathy, Glacial Spike, Slick Ice, Thermal Void, Cold Snap, Cold Front, Death Chill, Ice Color. So, yeah, they removed a lot of abilities in favor of this being your gameplay loop now. So, this is intended to heavily simplify the spec in the wake of no combat weak orders. So Ice Lance now doesn't have this weird shatter effect. Shatter is only this flat damage thing. We do still have a bit of crit scaling on it, but there's no such thing as a soft cap or anything, because we're not actually shattering the spell, we're shattering this flat damage event. So that makes things a little weird, right? We actually have no way to improve the crit rate of any of our spells. We can just only do this flat damage effect, which has no interactivity, so kind of strange. Ice Lance now doesn't really cleave with Splitting Ice. It only cleaves to these targets that are freezing. So it's essentially like a dot and then dot removal spell. In that sense, we have potentially a little bit of spread cleave, but it's nearby enemies, so I don't actually think it's going to be that impactful. And you'll notice it's actually much weaker, right? So now it does up to 5. You can actually get it up to 7. So Ice Lance is essentially a 7-target spell in AoE, if you can manage to work on that. So, yeah. It's a little weird. Doesn't cleave to 2 targets unless you have freeze on the second target. So anyway, then you have Blizzard, right? Blizzard is actually essentially unchanged. They did reduce its cooldown back down to 10 seconds. We still have Fingers of Frost, which just makes your Ice Lance shatter the target as if it was freezing, which means that it's going to cause that flat damage effect. And then we have Icicles. Icicles are completely reworked. Now they're just passively generated every 5 seconds. And then after you get 5, so after 25 seconds, your Frostbolt turns into Glacial Spike. And Glacial Spike just applies more stacks of freezing and does more damage. It doesn't root or anything anymore. So you'll just have this every time when you enter combat, essentially, and then in combat every 25 seconds. And then Frozen Orb still exists. Should it? Probably not. There's actually no Blizzard CDR at all in Frozen Orb, so it's a little strange. It basically exists as a source of passive Fingers of Frost or passive freezing, but neither of those guaranteed. They did remove the guaranteed Fingers of Frost from when Frozen Orb first hits an enemy. And then we still have Freezing Rain. And now we have, instead of Cold Snap, that Cone of Cold applies 3 stacks of freezing to up to 5 enemies. Weird amount, because that's less than the total that Ice Lance can consume, and 5 enemies is also less than the amount that Ice Lance can hit. So kind of strange. One of the benefits is in the class tree we do have this talent node where Ice Nova replaces Cone of Cold, so this could make it so that you would be able to apply that freezing at range and no longer need to be in melee. The downside to that is they said Supernova was removed, so you might only have Dragon's Breath now, so you still have to be melee for Dragon's Breath. And also, this Ice Nova says a 20-second cooldown, and Cone of Cold has a 12-second cooldown, so you might just get less freezing stacks if you played Ice Nova. Also, this Ice Nova still roots, and ideally they would remove all roots from our rotational thing, because that just messes with CC and everything. So, we'll see. Don't know how strong that is. Says coming soon, but this is actually Ice Flows. So they removed Ice Flows from the general tree. We still have Shimmer. You're going to have a longer cooldown Shimmer, but you'll still have 2 charges and the reset from Alter Time. But yeah, there's going to be a passive version of Ice Flows here, which isn't really that good because this is probably not in the spot where we want to take it, because it's just in the second gate, which is competitive, and also it's passive, and unless it's like, oh, you can just always cast like Ray of Frost and Glacial Spike while moving, it's probably not going to get taken, just like Foresight was never taken for Arcane. But it's nice that we potentially could have Ice Flows and Shimmer. I guess I should go back up here and mention that, so Icy Veins completely removed. They reworked Cold Snap a little bit. Now you have the choice between the active or just 2 charges of block and barrier. This is worse for block, better for barrier. So when you have Cold Snap and you actually use it, it will work to have both cooldowns going concurrently, right? Because you could Ice Cold and then Cold Snap Ice Cold, and then your Ice Cold is on CD and so is your Cold Snap. So in 5 minutes you'll have another 2 uses of Ice Cold, but that's not really how it would work if it has 2 charges because they have to recharge sequentially. It's worth knowing this Cold Snap technically also reduces or resets the cooldown of Cone of Cold, which, as we saw, could have some damage capabilities. I don't think that's really going to matter. Okay, Ray of Frost is now our damage CD. We do not have Icy Veins. They've removed Icy Veins entirely. There's a bunch of interactivity with Ray of Frost later on, especially the Apex talent. So yeah, and you just cast Ray of Frost, right? You can't shatter it or anything anymore. Shatter's just flat damage thing, so you just cast it. You have it off CD, you press it, and then it just does stuff. So this generates some stacks of freezing. And then we still have Splintering Ray, Lamau, versus this choice of Frigid Focus where its damage is increased by 100%. Don't really like this because if you take Splintering Ray, your Ray of Frost is literally doing half its damage in single target, and you need to be on 5 target for it to do more damage than Frigid Focus, which is kind of weird in my opinion because Splintering Ray does not hit the main target. So yeah, technically it gets its most damage at 6 targets, but yeah, you need to be at 5 targets for it to be normal. So don't really like that. But yeah, so that's Ray of Frost. We still have Winter's Blessing, so you're still gonna have a lot of haste. This is pretty nerfed. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if, like, given some of these other nodes, if you like didn't end up taking this at least early on. It's only 3% haste. I think it's 8 currently. But yeah, so going down the left side, you just have like when Frostbolt crits, it applies an additional stack of freezing. Damage for Blizzard has a chance to get a freezing. So when you have Orb and Blizzard out, that's just going to give you more freezing in AoE, which leads to you doing, like more Ice Lances and more Shatters in AoE, so do more damage. Then you just have Flurry, which applies 3 stacks of freezing. It's essentially the same as it is now, except there's no Winter's Chill. This increases the charges of Fingers of Frost. You're probably gonna take 1 point of this, but it's a 2-point node to take 1 to 2, and that's really awkward. Like, I think it's weird that Fingers of Frost is max 1 charge because there's forcing you to take this when you don't really want to. So we'll have to see. I would say it's probably likely you only ever take one of these. Then you have shatter damage as an increased chance of crit. Again, shatter is just the flat damage you get from consuming the freezing debuff. So, this just means as you stack crit, it'll have a higher crit chance. This is maybe likely to be used. I mean, a 2-point node is crazy. There's just a bunch more 2-point nodes here that makes it very tough to really get everything you want, probably. And we are going to have to be stacking some crit, right? But because the crit effect works here, and then there's a crit damage thing for shatter later, and some crit damage stuff on like the Frostfire tree. So it looks like we'll be stacking crit and haste for a couple reasons. And then we still have Brain Freeze, you still have Frozen Touch. We have this. Splay Ice now only works with Frostborn Flurry. This should mean that you essentially double your freezing when you are casting, so your 2 target should be pretty good when they're clumped. Our 2 target wasn't that bad when they're clumped, it wasn't exceptional, and I still am not sure if it's going to be exceptional. And the main problem I have with this is that it doesn't really solve our issue in raids of 2 target. Like here, for instance, here I am on Dimensius. This is like, the most recent example, literally this tier, right? You got these living mass spawns, you got the boss, and the call here is always going to be, okay, ranged, hit the far one. And you know what happens when I hit the far one? I don't cleave anything. So this has been Frost's problem in raid, is they never make a 2 target boss that isn't spread cleave. And when they do things like this, where you want to cleave off the boss in the ad, you're not going to do that because the melee are cleaving here, because the melee have no other option. As ranged, you're always told to hit this ad. And when that happened again? Last tier, when you're doing one-arm bandit, and you got the boss dragged over here to this ad, and then you got the far ad over here that no one's hitting, and they're like, okay, range, hit the far ad. And you know what happens? Frost doesn't cleave. And this is always going to be ranged duty in raid. And so making a spec that doesn't work with this is bad, in my opinion. And I really wanted them to solve that. That's part of why I was pushing like kind of the spread cleave angle, is that if I'm hitting this guy and my flurry doesn't go to at least this person, I'm just fucked. That's it. Like, I'm fucked. What is the use in being a 2 target class when anytime there is potential cleave, I can't cleave because my duty in the raid is to do this, right? That's what every range does. And you can say, oh, just cleave off the boss like, fire mages were going to. I mean, that's just a disservice to my raid. They would much rather have range damage here because these ads are going to die way before you need them to because of all the melee you have anyway. So I don't think they solved that, but I think they need to for Frost to have value in raid, because this is, they didn't change anything about Frost. If anything, they made it worse by removing Icy Veins. So now you have a flatter damage profile and still an inability to cleave in the actual situations that they're creating for you to cleave in recent times. So that's terrible. Anyway, then they have this, which is just AoE. So this is literally just glacial fragments, but it's kind of weird because it's like your Ice Lance's fracture dealing damage to additional freezing enemies, and that shatters. But like that's already what this is doing. Like this is already shattering, like when it cleaves. So what if you consume the freeze with this, and then your fractured frost doesn't work? I don't think this is kind of weird. And also in the dev note, they said your freezing application rate is significantly higher than your primary target. Thus, fractured frost should almost eliminate the need to target swap in AoE scenarios. And they meant this for, like, let's say you're applying a lot of freezing from your Blizzard and Orb, and suddenly you consume all the freezing on your primary target, but now you want to swap to your secondary target because that guy still is freezing. So they just wanted you to, like, not swap off your primary target, and then this would just consume the other freezing. That seems weird. I feel like that's literally just this. I think, in fact, I feel like what this does is just make the other 5 Ice Lances actually consume freezing or something. I don't know. That's kind of weird. I don't really understand how that works. But yeah. So then we have Water Elemental, currently permanent. There's this coming soon. This is the second talent. We don't know what it is. This one's Ice Flows. And so, maybe they'll make Water Elemental not permanent and it'll be a CD or something. Doesn't seem likely. So I imagine Water Elemental is going to do something because this talent doesn't connect to anything else. So it's just going to be a bonus to Water Elemental. And then we just have Piercing Cold for some reason existing. Then we have this boring, just damage increase to Flurry and Ice Lance, complemented by this Frostbolt Glacial Spike damage increase. And then here being Shatter Crit Strike damage is increased by a percentage of crit chance. So this is where the crit scaling comes in. Primarily comes from Frostbolt critting, applying an additional stack of freezing, Shatter benefiting essentially double from your chance to crit strike, and then also benefiting by increasing its crit strike damage by your crit chance. This is actually kind of weak because scaling crit strike damage is worse than scaling damage. So that's a little weird, but if Shatter is important, it could be good. And this is also quite strong because you just have so many stacks of freezing. We'll look at that later. So then on this side, we have just all the Ray of Frost stuff. So this makes Ray of Frost generate 2 additional frames of frost over its duration. This seems kind of weak. This has the time it takes to generate icicles reduced by 1 second. This essentially means that you can Glacial Spike 5 seconds sooner, right? So that's all icicles do. It just means you can Glacial Spike 5 seconds sooner. So this could be good. And then we have over its duration, Ray of Frost generates 5 icicles and reduces the cooldown of Flurry and Frozen Orb by 16 seconds. So this is good. This is the only CDR for Frozen Orb that Frostfire has access to, because there's no Blizzard CDR for Frozen Orb anymore. So Spellslinger still has its flat CDR to Frozen Orb, which seems very strong, but Frostfire has nothing. So this is the only CDR that Frostfire could have, and Frostfire is very likely to go down this path because it has empowerments to Glacial Spike and to Frostbolt. So this makes Ray of Frost generate a Glacial Spike. It's the only way that you get more Glacial Spikes than just the base, right? Because otherwise you have to wait 20 seconds or 25 seconds to get Glacial Spike. But this ensures that you get it instantly from Ray of Frost, and then also reduces some cooldown. So this seems solid for Glacial Spike builds if it's worth it. And then the middle seems very strong. So this Iceland shares additional stack of freezing. Very good, less Ice Lance cast. Glacial Spike has 100% chance to grant you Frames of Frost. Again, we're only Glacial Spiking without this talent every like 25 seconds. This seems a little weak. Probably won't take that. Third gate, things are tough. This is strong, where Ice Lance increases shatter damage by 10% for 8 seconds, and multiple applications can overlap. We are just slamming Ice Lance. Like I mentioned it earlier, and I'll show you here. I guess now we've kind of go through stuff, but sorry, Preheat, stealing your video. He just Glacial Spiked into Ray of Frost, and now he has 20 freezing stacks, and he has 2 Frames of Frost. So you're just gonna Ice Lance, 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 Ice Lance. Like he still had at least 3 more Ice Lances to go there. Okay, so they probably need to tamp down a little bit on the Ice Lances. It's a little freaking ridiculous, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so this seems like it'll be good. And then you have this, which is just Frostbite again, so maybe some weird alpha stuff. We'll find out more tomorrow. So for Spellslinger, I don't imagine Spellslinger will really go down this right side. It doesn't really like Glacial Spiking all that much. And this being increased damage, Frostbolt Glacial Spike is worse because for Frostfire, this would increase Frostfire Bolt damage, and Frostfire Bolt does like 50% more damage than Frostbolt. But on this side, we have Flurry and Ice Lance damage increase, which is more valuable. We have Fractured Frost now causes your Ice Lance to damage 2 additional freezing enemies. So this means that you would do 7 target instead of 5 target. This is just Glacial Assault, but instead of doing a damage amp, it gives you a stack of freezing. So that's kind of solid. Again, it just gives you a bunch more freezing stacks, which is synergistic with this. And then we have this where casting Ray of Frost replaces Blizzard with Comet Storm, and this is the only other thing that can consume freezing. It consumes 7 stacks of freezing. So yeah, this doesn't seem like terribly strong, to be honest. It is nice that they found a way to keep Comet Storm, without button bloat or anything. So this is kind of solid. But I don't know. I think casting Comet Storm once per Ray of Frost seems a little weak. They also didn't increase the radius of Comet Storm, and the radius of Blizzard versus Comet Storm is comical. Comet Storm is tiny, and Blizzard is not. Comet Storm is, however, uncapped, kind of. I mean, it's soft capped at 20. So if they increase this radius to be commensurate to Blizzard's, I think this could be pretty solid for actual AoE. And again, it's the only other thing that can consume freezing, and it consumes freezing in even more of an AoE than Ice Lance, right? But in order for it to consume it in AoE, it has to hit the mob. And Comet Storm not very consistent about hitting mobs because it's, again, very small, which doesn't matter as much now because we cast it so frequently. But in this case, it definitely needs a radius increase. It could also consume 2 stacks of freezing per, because as you saw in the preheat thing, he's just like, this is just an insane amount of freezing, right? He's got 20. He ice lances. Before he even ice lances again, he goes back up 2 more stacks. He ice lances. Before he ice lances again, he goes back up 4 stacks. Like, he's just, this frozen orb is generating a bunch. So yeah, we do not have enough capability to consume freezing in the current alpha state, I would say. Okay, now we have our Apex talents. So our Apex talents is that Shattering Enemy has a 10% chance to summon a Hand of Frost, freezes the target, does some damage, and applies 2 stacks of freezing. This seems interesting, especially if we go further down, right, where each stack of freezing you shatter increases your chance to summon a Hand of Frost by an additional 2%, and damage from Hand of Frost increases your spell damage by 4% for 8 seconds, and that can overlap. And then the last one is Ray of Frost summons 4 Hands of Frost over its duration, and Ray of Frost gains additional charge, and it has increased damage. It's not actually a 1%, it's probably 10 or something. So 2 charges of Ray of Frost is really good because Ray of Frost, enables Comet Storm, or enables additional glacial spikes and ice, which is just icicles, so it enables more icicles. And then it also summons all these Hands of Frost, which also give you, at this point, 16% damage amp at least. So this seems pretty solid, especially if you want to lean into these, and especially because they generate a bunch of stacks of freezing. The weird thing is that this means that you're now almost capped on freezing just from pressing Ray, because you're guaranteed 8 stacks from Ray of Frost and 8 stacks from the 4 Hands of Frost it summons. So now it's 16 stacks, and then if you add Fingers of Frost, it's just so many stacks of freezing and everything. I do think like this passive freezing stuff is going to be good from like Frozen Aura, from Hands of Frost, from Spellslinger, but yeah, so that's what they've done here. I think Frozen Orb's really weird. It doesn't really have a place for like Fringe of Frost, right? It has no interaction. Like Blizzard and Frozen Orb don't technically both need to exist. Of the two, I would say remove Blizzard probably, just because Frozen Orb now follows enemies, which is nice. Though if you saw in the video, it has like a second before it actually, see, like it's moving away for a second, and it's like, oh yeah, let me move back. So that's kind of weird, right? Because he's gonna cast it, and then we'll see. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it takes like 4 seconds for it to be like, oh yeah, let me start following this guy. So you definitely still want to be a little concerned about like his minimum range traveled and whatnot. It does look like they increase its radius. That looks very large. Definitely want to do that for Comet Storm and Ice Nova. So anyway, to the hero talents. Frostfire says replaces Glacial Spike, definitely replaces Frostfire Bolt or Frostbolt. Frostfire Empowerment now is just a 10% chance from your Frostfire spells, which they made more Frostfire spells. And then Frostfire or Severe Temperature, they made just do more AoE damage, and then also give you can stack Frostfire Empowerment initial time, which is nice. They did this where Flurry now does Frostfire damage, and that means that it'll also apply Ignite. And then we have this tier set, so casting Glacial Spike, cast Pyro Blast. For Pyro Blast, you have a chance to cast Glacial Spike. There's a bit of a mismatch here, right? Because now we're completely unable to do anything to this Pyro Blast, or Meteor, which still exists from Isothermic Core. So Fire can still crit the Comet Storm, right? Because, it has combustion, but we can't do that, right? We can't do anything to this Pyro Blast or this Meteor because we don't no longer have Shatter in the function that you used before. So this is actually just completely uninteractive, right? It literally does nothing. The only thing it does is because Glacial Spike casts Pyroblast, now you want to take, more Glacial Spike things, perhaps. But otherwise, this has no interactivity with our tree. So that's kind of bad. They also just made it reduce the cooldown of Ray and make, Ray gives you Frostfire Empowerment. And then you have to have a higher chance to keep Brain Freeze from Frostfire Bolt. So yeah, the other thing that's so ironic about this is that it doesn't mention anything for freezing or shatter for either Meteor or Pyroblast, and they changed our mastery And so our mastery is now increases the damage of spells that freeze your enemies, or spells that damage or that shatter. Okay, you know what Pyroblast and Meteor don't do from this? They don't shatter and they don't freeze. So that means that they reworked our mastery, and it still doesn't work with Frostfire. So I mean that is just wild to me, to be honest. Like that, I cannot believe that. So yeah, that's weird. Ideally, especially because we need more freezing in it, they would make like the meteor from Frostfire Bolt or from Frostfire consume some freezing stacks, because that would incentivize you to go Comet Storm even in single target, right? And then for Frostfire, it would like go down the left side and the right side and have the more GS from Glaciate, and actually have Comet Storm. I mean, it will have Comet Storm either way, probably in single target from this. But again, one stack of freezing is like nothing to consume. You saw how many we had, so making Meteor consume more would be good. So yeah, just kind of weird that Frostfire doesn't work at all with Mastery still, and that it has no interactivity with our entire thing, versus Fire's going to want to cast Meteor and Combust still to get the shatters or the crits, and that's going to work for him, and we can't do anything. So Spellslinger is definitely now a better iteration for Frost. Casting Frostbolt Flurry makes a Splinter. You get Splinters from Frozen Orb. Your Water Elemental has a chance to generate Splinters, or just when you get Brain Freeze, you generate Splinters. You're probably going to take the Water Elemental one potentially. Depends, really. And then, chance to gain extra freezing stacks when you generate Splinters. And then you have Ice Lance removes an additional freezing stack. This is really powerful, especially with that middle thing. So you can consume up to, at this point, like 6 freezing stacks at a time, which is also going to increase the chance that you generate Hands of Frost. Of course, technically having more freezing stack generation could be worse, because it's a flat 10%, and it's only 2% per freezing stack. And since the base is 4, right, 4 to 10% is not equivalent to 2%. So it should really be like 2.5% if they wanted it to be equal to a whole nother cast of Ice Lance. But also not having to do a whole cast of Ice Lance is good. Anyway, so we still have this. This is crazy for Spellslinger, right? Reducing the cooldown of Frozen Orb, because there's no other way to reduce its cooldown. So this means that Spellslinger is likely going to have much better AoE. And Ice Lance conjures a Frost Splinter for every 2 freezing stacks shattered from its primary target. This means you can make 3 Splinters every Ice Lance if you have this and the other talent. So you're shattering 6 freezing stacks. So 3 Splinters is a lot for every Ice Lance, especially when Fingers of Frost also does it without actually consuming any. You get double Splinter generation when you do Ray of Frost, and if this works with Splintering Cold, you could generate a lot of Splinters as well in AoE. Glacial Spike makes additional Frost Splinters, that's fine. And then we have the AoE when it's under Blizzard, and then you have Splinter Storm, just generates Brain Freeze, does exactly the same thing it did before. And then you also have this, where when Splinters are removed, they do AoE damage. So Spellslinger has way more interactivity, because scaling shatters means that you get more Frozen Orb CDR. More Frozen Orb CDR means you get more stacks of freezing, you get more Frozen Orb damage, you get higher uptime as Permafrost Lances. I would go as far to say is Frostfire is just terrible, to be honest, for Frost. It's poorly designed, unless they actually add something to Meteor or to Pyroblast. It just doesn't really work that well in light of the rework, versus Spellslinger is very well designed around the rework. So yeah, Spellslinger just seems like way more powerful. And then to talk about some of the other changes that didn't end up showing up on the Frost tree, they what do we want to talk about? So one of the big ones is down here. They made it so that so Blizzard can be a unit target version itself, and then this Haste reduces the equivalent of the following spells: Flurry, Frozen Orb, and Ray of Frost. This is ridiculous. On one hand, this is like insane for Spellslinger because it means you have higher uptime on the double splinters. Frozen Orb CDR double dips because it means that your flat CDR from Spellslinger is even stronger, and also means you just get more splinters, which means you get even more CDR. Again, that's also what Ray Frost does. Since it's based on haste, this also means that you scale incredibly hard as you go deeper into an expansion because you have less haste at the start and way more at the end. So this is just kind of a terrible idea, to be honest, because it's going to change your CD timings from Ray Frost for like different fights, depending on how much haste you have, which isn't good. And it just heavily overfavors Spellslinger. And so Frostfire just kind of sucks. So that's just kind of it. But yeah. Okay, that's really most of what we want to talk about for the rework. Hopefully I give you a good idea of kind of what the idea is of how you're playing, right? You kind of saw how he did this. Technically, what you could do, right, especially if you go down the right side, you could like open the Glacial Spike into Ray, into another Glacial Spike. The issue is you've now overcapped freezing stacks, so now you need to like Ice Lance literally 40 times. So yeah, you need to like Ice Lance like at least twice probably. Yeah, it's kind of terrible. Really, you wouldn't want to do the double GS. You'd want Ice Lance here, and then do another GS, and then you would like potentially Frozen Orb, and then you would like Ice Lance spam times like 7, and then you could go into potentially another Ray, into another GS, into, I guess here you would probably Comet Storm, so you'd Ice Lance, or actually you could place this with Comet Storm because that also consumes it. So you get GS, Ray, Comet Storm, GS, Frozen Orb, Ice Lance times 7, or times 4, and then Ray into GS into Comet Storm. It's just, so it's just weird. But then your rotation would entirely change if you didn't take the GS thing. You're playing the other stuff. So it's a little strange. But yeah, so here are the problems down here. Comet Storm's radius is way too small for being infrequent, and it's awkward when it replaces the much larger Blizzard. It just doesn't really make sense. Ice Nova needs not root. They made GS not root. Let's say also needs same CD as kind of cold. They also increase kind of cold CD. It doesn't need a 12-second CD. It can be 20. That's fine. But yeah, so like GS, given it gives freezing generation potentially if it replaces kind of cold, and that means that you really don't want it to root because that just messes with dungeons. Freezing mechanic limits target swapping. Fracture Frost AoE is nothing to do with target swapping. Don't really understand dev note. The problem is that the freezing disappears when the target dies. It doesn't like transfer to anything. And if you want to swap prior targets, you're like leaving 20 stacks on something, which seems terrible. Ice Lance basically being the only thing that consumes freezing along with free cast of Fierce Frost leads to very heavy Ice Lance gameplay. You see that right here. Like, look at this. You do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and he still could have done 3 more Ice Lances. Okay, that's 11 Ice Lances in a row. That's not necessary. All right, that is not necessary. In large part, this is due to Hands of Frost, I imagine, as well. But yeah, this is just way too heavy Ice Lance focused, and we'll talk about that in a second. Icicles being passively generated so slowly makes Glacial Spike missed, right? You only get it like once every 20 seconds, not great. And it's actually a prime thing that could benefit from being hasted. So Ray and Orb being hasted massively favors Spellslinger. Icicles being hasted is really good, just smooth out your gameplay, gives you more access to Glacial Spike. I would prefer like there was some way for you to get more Glacial Spikes that wasn't just it being hasted, because right now there's like a massive lack of skill expression. So, and that could be solved. Here we'll say massive lack of skill expression. Best case, let's say increase Shatter by Comet Storm and Meteor, make GS consume freezing, not generate freezing. So this could be good changes. Again, Ray and Orb being hasted massively in Spellslinger over the course of an expansion due to the haste, and also shifts your CD times based on haste, so that's kind of awkward tuning-wise. Cleave is super awkward. Again, one of our bandit shit stuff and the demi stuff. The range job is always going to be to hit this large guy, and trying to like awkwardly force us to not do that just puts you at conflict with your raid and what your raid needs. So we need a larger cleave radius. We need to be able to cleave at this distance. We need to be able to cleave, you know, from here to here, right? We need massive cleave radius, and we don't have that. I'm worried about the flat damage thing too, but yeah, it's fine. So yeah, and then skill expression, I think this is going to get boring fast, especially over the course of this expansion. You've seen a lot of people express dissatisfaction with Sunfury Arcane, and they're essentially making every spec the same difficulty level as Sunfury Arcane, and I worry that that's going to lead to a lot of dissatisfaction in long-term gameplay. So I think having a little bit more skill expression would be good. The main way to do that would be to make, you know, Glacial Spike not reliant on a passive thing, so make it instead, you know, work with casts. But doing that without having weak auras present is kind of weird. Let's say freezing, terrible, visual, hard, PC. Like the fact that they remove combat add-ons and then they're asking you to like look at this. Oh, he has 20 stacks of freezing. How am I supposed to know this guy has 20 stacks of freezing? I'm squinting. That's just tiny, and there's no combat add-ons, so there's no way for me to show that, right? The debuff should show up somewhere here, and be, you know, much more visible, right? Like why are we showing permafrost lances, but we're not showing freezing? And this is their cooldown manager, by the way. So freezing needs to be on the cooldown manager, but even if it's not on the cooldown manager or is on the cooldown manager, how's that going to work in AoE? Like it's so hard for you to tell how many stacks of freezing if there's like 30 mobs here. How am I going to tell how many of freezing? It's just, it doesn't work. Which is one of the main problems with them removing combat functionality, is it hurts debuffs much harder than it hurts buffs, because they're focusing a lot with the cooldown manager on buff focus, and they're not focusing on debuffs, and it just looks terrible. Also, you know, concerned about tap targeting or flurry since you're removing macros. So yeah. Anyway, these are my problems. I can't type this on the forums because the forums aren't up yet, and I'm also not in the alpha, so I won't even have access to the forums when that happens. But, you know, just give you a bit of an idea of how Frost is going to play and kind of the issues with it. Yeah, long video, a lot of ranting, covered all the talents. But I think this is, you know, I've talked quite a bit about all the problems I thought about. I'll say Orb feels useless for Frostfire. I'll say Frostfire has 0 interactivity with base kit. And then we're also going to say Frostfire doesn't scale with mastery. Lol, question mark. So yeah, I can't believe that. Anyway, obviously this is alpha. They're going to change some stuff. I would definitely just like to see this smoothed out a little bit, and I definitely want ice flows to be I want it to be tuned well and in a good position for us to take it. I do think that in general, it, you know, from my first glance, it kind of appears like there's going to be a decent difference in how the specs play, but I think that Frostfire in particular lost a lot of agency by removing, you know, freezes, shattering spells. You know, Meteor and Comet Storm just feel worse now. And I think it's easy for them to fix this a little bit, but, you know, not too much, because again, Cone of Cold only applies 3 stacks, so you can't like Cone of Cold into Comet Storm because you're missing out on 4 stacks from the Comet Storm, and that doesn't work with how I you mentioned you would want to work with Meteor as well, consuming even more stacks of freezing. So yeah, I'll probably keep making videos about this. I don't think this was, you know, this wasn't super premeditated in how I made this, and I think I'm definitely gonna regret not mentioning some Blizzard and Orb stuff. Like I said, I think they should remove Blizzard, and we have Frozen Orb, and that works fine enough. But then you have the interactivity it has with Spellslinger is just too strong. So don't really know what they're doing. We do still have a lot of button bloat as well, right? In AoE, you're pressing Ice Throw or kind of cold, you're pressing Ice Lance, you're pressing Flurry, you're pressing Frostbolt, you're pressing Orb, right? You're pressing Ray of Frost. So these are all buttons that you're going to be pressing quite a bit in your area rotation. So we actually still have a decent amount going on in Mythic Plus. compared to a lot of other specs. I maybe missed some random ability as well. I didn't say Blizzard. Yep. So yeah, we got a lot of buttons still relative to a lot of specs. But this was a very weird decision for them to like oversimplify the game to this degree. And also ironic if you watch Max's video where he talked about how WoW players wouldn't swap to Fellowship because it was too simple. I think they're really underthinking the amount that people appreciate rotational complexity in WoW. It's not like the rotations are too terribly complex, but this is still going to be tough for the people that rotations are tough for, and it's just gonna be brain dead for the people who they're not for. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. This is obviously like a crazy amount of stuff to come out today, so I've just been on Discord all the time looking at that, and I'd love to know what you guys are thinking, what your thoughts are about next expansion without the combat add-ons, how you're thinking the ideas for the Frost stuff is going, and what you'd like to see for Frost over the course of Alpha. So